Representative Jeffries, it's great to see you.
Good to see you always.
Absolutely, it's been much longer than I'm willing to admit. I was, excited about meeting with you today to catch up, and I was kind of reflecting on, the earlier years in terms of when we first connected, and it's just been a wonderful thing to see in terms of the trajectory of your career and the work that you've done. And, on behalf of all your constituents, definitely thank you. And thanks for taking some time to chat today.
It's good to be with you, and it's an honor to represent you.
Absolutely. And, you are definitely one of the more active members of Congress, and your work speaks for itself. And I think one of the things that I know and appreciate is the work that you do behind the scenes. Right, the work you do on the Sundays, the work you do at the subway stations throughout the summer, and some of those little things that I think go a long way in terms of making you really connect with the community. And I think, viewers would really appreciate understanding that better, because there are a number of people who have public sector aspirations, and I think it's important that they understand the work that goes in order to really do an effective job.
Well, one of the things that was important to me from a very early point in my public service journey, when I was first elected to the state assembly, where I served up in Albany for 6 years, and then more recently, over the last few terms as a member of the United States House of Representatives, was to make sure that I could continue a high level of intimate engagement with the people that I represent. When you are out on the campaign trail, one of the things you hear most often is that, why is it the case that we only seem to see our elected officials when they're asking for us to vote for them, and then they disappear until the next time it's an election? Yeah. And that's an understandable concern and frustration that people have traditionally had as it relates to what may be appropriately termed career politicians.
Sure.
I think there were many of us who came in the last 10 or so years, a new generation of elected officials who wanted to try to break that stereotype that had existed. Some of it was fair as it relates to prior office holders, some of it was not.
Sure.
But we understood that that was a sentiment that existed. And so my view was, how can you continue the same intensity of engagement as you are governing, similar to what you would have been doing on the campaign trail? And to some degree, understandably, when you're elected to the state legislature, you spend a considerable amount of time doing your job in Albany.
Sure.
And so you're away from the district. If you're elected to the House of Representatives, we spend a significant amount of time in Washington, D.C. doing the people's business. But back home, I've tried to replicate the intensity as much as possible of the type of engagement that you would ordinarily see, for instance, on the campaign trail.
Sure.
So we've done that in a few different ways. One, we start the year regularly with a State of the District address, where in recent times we've been drawing over 1,000 people from all across the district to hear me lay out the issues that I think are going to be important for us as a community and for me as their representative to tackle throughout the year.
Sure.
Establish a benchmark of accountability. A few other things that we do between May and the fall, at least twice a month, we do Congress on Your Corner events, where we'll go out to a post office or a subway station or a library or a heavily traveled intersection, simply to just meet with any constituent that wants to show up and engage with their member of Congress. We set up a desk, chair, bring my staff out, and spend a few hours in the community, and we go to every corner of the community that is possible.
Sure.
And the other thing we regularly do is hold telephone town hall meetings when I'm in Washington, D.C., where we also regularly draw between 1,000 and 2,000 people who will spend about an hour on the phone, and I'll take questions from them on a variety of different topics. Again, folk coming from all different neighborhoods within the congressional district. And we do that every few months to try to continue to keep the community briefed about what's happening, and also to hold me and the office accountable.
Okay. Now, that's wonderful. I know you've been doing that for years, but it's always mind-boggling to me knowing how busy you are and the fact that you make time to do that. I figured it'd be important for you to share it, and that's amazing. The other thing which I think oftentimes people don't realize is at the end of the day, you're a person just like all of us, and you have a wife, you have children. When we met, you had babies, and now you have nearly adults.
Yeah, 16 and 13.
Right, 16 and 13, well-adjusted, and that takes some balancing. Can you speak to that, kind of how you balance the responsibilities of being a member of Congress and the family and the children and everything?
Well, I think the professional family balance has always been a delicate one for
Sure.
all of us who have the privilege of serving in elected office. It's something that we understand going in, and in many ways, it's the family that's sacrificing a lot because of the level of commitment that is required to do this job well. But I've been blessed that the family has appreciated, the importance of the work that we are trying to do, and has been flexible in tolerating some of the times where work does require me in the past to be up in Albany, or in its current form to be down in Washington, D.C., even when I was otherwise expected to be home,
Sure.
like in the last few days as a result of the reckless Republican shutdown, in my view.
Sure.
That's a whole nother story. But these are the
We
types
can get into
of things.
that.
Yeah, it's been important, and several elected officials who had been in office prior to me arriving made clear that the one regret that they've had over time is they'll look back on their journey and they can remember the birthday parties or the special occasions or the soccer games that they may have missed. They
Sure.
can't remember the votes that they missed them for.
Sure.
And they said, make sure that you establish an appropriate balance as you move forward. And in the family context, we all have an understanding community.
Yep.
And I think a community that respects the fact that there is a responsibility that exists, to be a father and a husband as well.
Absolutely. And as a father of two myself, I can definitely appreciate that fine balance. And I think you're right. The rewards that you receive from the time you spend with the little ones in the family are innumerable, but obviously the work you're doing is extremely important. So find that balance goes a long way. So, it's definitely great getting a better sense for what happens behind the scenes. But now we definitely want to talk a bit more about the issues, right? You've been on it for, 5 years in Congress now. You've been one of the more active members of Congress. And I'd love to get a better sense of what the issues that are currently top of mind to you are, and maybe talk about those a bit.
For me, I think what's always been important, because there are a whole host of challenges that we face in this nation that we have to deal with. We have a Voting Rights Act that was decimated by an unfortunate Supreme Court decision back in 2013.
Sure.
And we need to repair that to make sure that every American has access to the ballot. That's fundamental to who we are as a country. We have challenges as it relates to dealing with the gun violence epidemic. Yep. That continues to flare up in different ways in urban America and in the context of the mass shooting situation that we've seen repeatedly over and over and over again, and most recently this year down in Texas, and of course in Las Vegas. And then of course we have challenges that hit closer to home as it relates to many of the communities that I represent and I spent a lot of time working on, which is criminal justice reform.
Sure.
As well as a broken immigration system. I've often said that in terms of putting into perspective where we spend the energy at the moment as an office and as sort of a mission, is the importance of the issue combined with the moment that we confront to be able to get something done.
Sure.
And when you can combine the two, all of those issues that I mentioned, gun violence prevention, immigration reform, fixing the Voting Rights Act, dealing with our broken criminal justice system, are all significant. And then in terms of tackling an issue at the moment with the intensity necessary to get something done, you ask the question, is there an opportunity to solve this problem right now? And if there is, we have to dive in with everything that we have.
Sure.
And in that context, I would suggest serving on the Judiciary Committee, which has jurisdiction over voting rights and immigration rights and gun ownership rights, as well as criminal justice, that the issue that is most ripe for us to get something accomplished in the context where Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the presidency is criminal justice reform.
Okay.
I'm thankful that many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have begun to acknowledge and recognize that the mass incarceration epidemic in the United States of America is a problem.
Sure.
We have 5% of the world's population, 25% of the world's incarcerated individuals in the United States of America alone.
Yep.
And if you look at our population, which is a little over 300 million, and you look at China plus Russia, which is about
1.5 billion.
1.5 billion, we still incarcerate more than those two countries combined. And those are supposed to be, and are in many ways, oppressive societies.
Sure.
In 1971, when Richard Nixon declared drug abuse public enemy number one, we had less than 350,000 people incarcerated in America. Today we've got over 2.1 million. Disproportionately African American and Latino, many coming from communities like those I represent in Bedford-Stuyvesant, traditionally Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, parts of the west end of Coney Island, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, East New York. And so, thankfully, I've discovered during my time in Congress that increasingly people on the right and the left, Democrats and Republicans, progressives and conservatives, recognize that we desperately need to fix our broken criminal justice system. Yeah. And there's an opportunity to do so, notwithstanding Jeff Sessions as Attorney General and Donald Trump. Let's put that to the side for a moment.
We'll go there.
Those are big elephants in the room. But there are Republican members of Congress that I serve with on the Judiciary Committee that want to deal with this problem. One, they recognize that spending $80 billion on incarceration in America is the equivalent of a wasteful government program that is not yielding public safety benefits, but is undermining our ability to deploy all of the human capital and economic resources in ways that could be far more productive. So you've got fiscal conservatives who are increasingly on board with criminal justice reform. Then you have the religious right, who in many ways, in the context of their religious beliefs, and I grew up in the Cornerstone Baptist Church, still go, believe fundamentally in the notion of redemption and transformation.
Sure.
If you make a mistake, you should get a second chance. And so a lot of folks in the religious right, Christian conservative community, believe in helping those reintegrate into society in a productive way and get a second chance at life. And then you have the libertarians, folks like Senator Rand Paul and, in the House of Representatives, Raul Labrador, who's a Freedom Caucus, very right-wing member of Congress from Idaho, but strongly supportive of criminal justice reform because of the belief that government overreach, when it takes the form of over-criminalization, is just about as damaging as can be, perhaps even more so than over-taxation and over-regulation.
Sure.
Because when government overreach, in their view, from a libertarian perspective, takes the form of criminalizing someone, you can take away someone's life or their liberty.
Yep.
And that's problematic. So we have the opportunity to build what I call a coalition of the unusual suspects.
Sure.
People who you would not expect to be on the same page about an issue. And we're trying to deal with tackling our broken criminal justice system, hopefully at some point this year.
Sure. And I think you hit on a good point in that there are obvious reasons why each of these different demographics would be supportive of prison reform. Recently, I saw an article that talked about the fact that there's no correlation between increased prison population and crime. If anything, it's actually the opposite. So over the last decade or so, many major cities, the prison population has actually decreased while crime has also decreased. And so then the question is, how do we get that to be readily accepted and legislated accordingly, and do more with respect to training and,
absolutely.
people don't
and
go back
to
in.
your point, which is a very important one, state after state, including many so-called red states, Texas, South Carolina, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, you've seen a wide variety of criminal justice reform measures that have been enacted into law by Republican governors and Republican-controlled state legislative bodies that have resulted in a reduction in the prison population, and crime hasn't gone up, it's gone down. That's also been the experience in California, and that certainly has been our experience in New York when we got rid of the draconian Rockefeller drug laws that were sending people away to prison sentences, often non-violent drug offenders, for incredibly egregious periods of time, as part of what I thought was an effort just to maintain a corrupt prison industrial complex.
Sure.
We broke that up in 2009, 2010, and again, crime hasn't gone up in New York City and New York State. It's actually gone down dramatically at the same time that the prison population has gone down dramatically.
Exactly. Two more topics with respect to things that I think are extremely important to your district. So economic development and education, two things where it's definitely lacking. Many people feel that they don't have enough opportunity. The unemployment rate in the district is much higher than that of the country at large. When you look at the stats at the national level, it's 4%, almost full employment. But then when you look at the stats locally, it's a different story. What are some of the measures that you're taking in order to help?
Yeah, no, it's a great and important question. It's part of the challenge in New York City, the wealthiest city in the country, if not the world.
Sure.
But you have pockets of economic hopelessness and challenge. I represent more public housing residents than almost any other member of Congress in the country. I think there's only one or two districts in America that actually have more public housing residents than in the 8th Congressional District. And this is a group of people who are hardworking, community-centered individuals. They've spent a lot of time going through some tough moments here in Brooklyn, as well as throughout the city.
Sure.
Have worked hard to turn things around in their communities, but haven't reaped the economic benefits of the socioeconomic gentrification that we've seen come to places like Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, Bedford-Stuyvesant, and increasingly into Brownsville, East New York, and parts of Bushwick that I also represent. And so we've got to do a better job as elected officials working with the mayor and the governor collectively to bring hope and economic opportunity. I'm pleased that Governor Cuomo has made the decision to invest a substantial amount of resources in Brooklyn as part of what he calls a Vital Brooklyn Initiative,
Sure.
which builds upon the Buffalo Billion, which was done several years ago to try to revitalize upstate New York. Many of us raised our voices and said we need a similar level of investment in urban America, urban New York City,
Sure.
and no better place to start based on the metrics than right here in Brooklyn.
Okay.
And so that's something that will increasingly be rolled out
Sure.
in the context of investment in our public health system, which also generates a lot of employment, investment in housing and the construction opportunities that are created, as well as investment in our young people to make sure that we're preparing them for the jobs of the 21st century economy.
Okay. Well, that's wonderful. It's good to hear. Recently, or when you did it, I saw you taking Attorney General Sessions to task in Congress, and it was very impressive. I'd love for you to talk about that experience a bit more, kind of what went into it, what's happened since then, and what do you see in terms of the future with respect to that?
Well, serving on the Judiciary Committee, we have oversight responsibility of the Department of Justice, and so every year the Attorney General comes before our committee. In the past, Eric Holder testified before the Judiciary Committee. Most recently, prior to this new administration, it was Loretta Lynch.
Sure.
This year in November, Jeff Sessions came before our committee. And obviously there's been a lot that's happening in terms of the entanglement of the Trump campaign with Russian spies who were apparently, as concluded by 17 different intelligence agencies, interfering with our election for the purpose of helping to make Donald Trump become president. Jeff Sessions was intimately involved in the Trump campaign, and many of us are still trying to sort out what exactly was his role in interacting with representatives of the Russian government who were close to Vladimir Putin at the same time when Russian spies were interfering in the election to try to alter the course of an American electoral outcome.
Sure.
And so when Sessions came before the committee, one of the things that was clear for me in terms of importance was to address the selective and convenient amnesia that he seems to have acquired as it relates to many of the contacts that he had with Russian operatives, including the former Russian ambassador, who's widely regarded as the top Russian spy in Washington, D.C. for Vladimir Putin. He conveniently has forgotten about many of these encounters until objective evidence emerges, and then he's forced to correct himself on the record, which he's done repeatedly.
Sure.
And I think the Judiciary Committee hearing was an opportunity for all of my colleagues on the Democratic side of the aisle to present the evidence and to try to unpack and uncover for the American people what exactly was going on with a senior player in the Trump campaign.
Sure. And for what it's worth, anyone who hasn't seen your interaction with Jeff Sessions on that date, I highly recommend that they go in and take a look. It's, in my view, kind of a centerpiece of what a rising member of Congress, hopes that one day they can do and really represent the people in a way that they can't represent themselves. And I thought that was very impressive.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And taking a step further back, kind of at the federal level and Trump and everything that's going on, what do you suggest that the average person do in order to make sure that they're able to maintain as many of their rights as possible? We have at least about 3 more years of Trump, hopefully not more. And so I know the midterm elections are coming up, and after that as well, there are many other challenges and so much going on. It can be a bit disorienting. People get distracted by smoke screens and things that are happening. And so what do you recommend that people do from a practical perspective in order to be helpful?
It's a great question. I think the most important thing is to first identify who your member of Congress is based on the neighborhood where you reside, and make it clear to that member of Congress what your priorities are. Get an understanding of how he or she has been voting on issues of importance, whether it's the tax bill or the effort to take away health care from 23 or 24 million Americans, as well as some of the other things that we've seen come out of this Trump administration, and forcefully but appropriately communicate to your representatives in office at all levels of government, by the way, but in the context of what's happening with this nightmare down in Washington, D.C., with your member of the House of Representatives. And people are surprised when I share with them that, in my experience, members of Congress pay close attention to the communications that they receive from their constituents on any given issue. We want to know what's the level of support or opposition to a particular position, what's the intensity of that support and opposition, what neighborhoods or communities is it coming from, and so everyone's voice in that regard can really make a difference in helping to make sure that your representative is accurately reflecting an individual's views or values or perspectives in this ongoing debate. The other thing I'd say is, after you've identified your representative and perhaps communicated with them through the many forms that are available, Twitter, Facebook, traditional fax machine, to the extent anyone has fax machines anymore, pick up the phone, call, email, whatever the case may be. show up at
Yep.
town hall meetings. We saw that was very effective early last year as part of the effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act and to jam, this reckless Trump care bill down our throats. Thousands and thousands of people showed up at town hall meetings all across America to voice their opposition to the effort to take people's health care away, and that effort ultimately failed.
Sure.
And so active participation in our democracy is the best thing that people can do. And we've seen an awakening as part of the resistance in the aftermath of Donald Trump's inauguration.
Sure.
And hopefully that will continue because our democracy will be better off if it does.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Those are some great insights. Hopefully people take that to heart. I know I have. I'm trying to do my best in spite of being very busy, because that's the thing that happens. We all get very busy and we make excuses for ourselves as to why we can't participate. And then we find out someone like Mr. Trump is president. So it's a rude awakening, but hopefully we're all more awake now, woke. I'm sure everybody speaks to you as a member of Congress and the different things you're working on. But again, at the end of the day, you're a human like anyone else. And we all have things that we care about, that we're passionate about. And so in this moment in time, is there one thing in particular that you're super passionate about?
I think the thing that's most important for me, and this has been a consistent problem throughout my entire public service journey, initially representing communities in Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, Prospect Heights, parts of Crown Heights and Bedford-Stuyvesant, and now in a congressional district that goes way beyond that. There have been tremendous changes that have taken place in Brooklyn, and It's been a phenomenal thing to see. And the quality of life for a lot of folks have improved significantly. The homicide rate, which was once through the roof, is incredibly low. The shootings are down, the burglaries are down, the amenities are way up that are available to folks. But it's a painful thing when you have folks, seniors, moderate income folks, lower income folks, who made it through the tough times, who contributed, who got involved as neighborhood watchers and civic leaders and participants in the precinct community councils, were involved in efforts through their churches or civic organizations to improve the quality of life in their neighborhoods, and were successful.
Sure.
And now have basically become victims of their own success because they can no longer afford to stay in the communities that they helped turn around.
Yep.
And that is not consistent with the American dream. That's not consistent with who we are in New York City as a gorgeous mosaic of people of different races and religions and backgrounds, and having different socioeconomic statuses. But we're in danger right now of becoming a place simply for the wealthy and the well-off. And I think we need an all hands on deck, every level of government involved in dealing with the issue of intense gentrification of communities that have traditionally been places where working families and young people and artists and senior citizens can call home.
Sure.
And now that things have turned around dramatically, and we welcome folks from all over the world, and that's a beautiful thing, but it should not come at the expense of those who have traditionally been living in these neighborhoods. And I just hope that at the end of my public service journey, whenever that may be, that we will have been able to have done something to halt the intensity of that march that is wiping out community after community after community.
Sure. No, that's a major issue. I've been in the district for the last 17, 18 years, and I feel like I've basically seen that entire cycle. And so neighborhoods that looked one way at that point are completely different now. And to your point, there are significant benefits, but it shouldn't come at the cost of the people who help to make it hip, who help to make it interesting. You have neighborhoods in Fort Greene that have imagery from the dawn of hip hop and music, and these people are legends, but their families and friends can no longer live in the neighborhoods where they grew up. So that's the issue that you're describing. I think it's important, and I hope, and I'm sure lots of people hope, that you're able to work on that. With that being said, that's a great segue to my follow-up question, right? I understand you're hardworking, I understand you're smart, and you can do a lot, but you're one person, right? What can the collective we do to be supportive of this effort to help, take some of the load off your shoulders?
I think the most important thing, and I say this to young people all the time, is to figure out the one issue that you're passionate about and figure out who's there as a member of Congress, as a community group, as a civic organization, as a church, as a synagogue, as a mosque, who's doing something about that issue, and how can you get involved in that effort? Because when you marry your passion for an issue with either an individual elected official, an office, an organization that's doing something about that issue, then there's really great synergy in terms of ultimately seeing something cross the finish line to affect change, whether it's the environment or education or housing or criminal justice reform. There are folks out there who are doing good work on all of these issues.
Sure.
But they're also up against people on the other side, the forces of the status quo, that are doing everything possible to halt progress or to turn back the clock. And so additional involvement, additional engagement, additional resources are important, but do it on an issue that you're most passionate about.
Excellent.